And open it up again. If everybody's here. Okay, this is the one. Oh, you have the whole thing printed already.
Wow.
Very efficient.
Better with
Yeah,
paper.
I totally understand. Totally understand. Yes. Okay, this is also taken from chapter 5 in the Talmud in Brachot. It's from that same area where we were discussing yesterday, but just a different topic that relates to a prayer. It's also, okay, I'll start from, yes, right before the one before. Our rabbis taught, blind man, one who cannot tell the cardinal points, meaning the points of where they are, north, south, east, west, should direct his heart towards his Father in heaven. What is the issue here? Because normally we pray to Jerusalem. But if a person doesn't know which direction it is, because they don't have a compass or because they can't see, so then they direct their thoughts to God, of course. Now, so a blind man or one who cannot tell the cardinal points should direct their heart towards their Father in heaven. As it says, and they prayed unto the Lord. If one is standing outside of Israel, they should turn towards Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, and to pray towards the land. If they're standing in Israel, they should pray towards Jerusalem, as it says, towards their land. As it says, and they pray unto the Lord towards the city which thou hast chosen. This, I think, is from Daniel. If you're standing in Jerusalem, you turn towards the temple. As it says, and they pray towards this house. Oh, that's excuse me, I think it's Solomon in Kings. I'm sorry, it doesn't say the source here. And if they're standing in the sanctuary, in the temple, they turn themselves towards the Holy of Holies, which is the inner sanctuary of the temple. As it says, and they pray towards this place. If they're the high priest and they're standing in the Holy of Holies, because he's the only one who could be there, then you turn yourself towards what's called the mercy seat. The mercy seat is you have the Ark of the Covenant, and there's a crown around the Ark of the Covenant. That is called the mercy seat. It's called kaporet in Hebrew. Kaporet from the word kapara means atonement. So I don't know why they call it the mercy seat, but it's called the crown of atonement. And yes, it says that when Moses walked into the tabernacle, he would hear God's voice from on top of the Ark of the Covenant, from the crown of the atonement. That's where he would hear it originating from. Even though he would hear it in his own head, but he knew it was originating from there. It's actually a very interesting verse in Numbers, because it says he heard the voice within himself, but he heard it from on top of the ark. So is it within himself or within top of the ark? Obviously, it was both. It was both. So, so this is our tradition that people pray towards Jerusalem, and I always say to people who are visiting the Temple Mount or the Western Wall, you have to realize that every Jew is praying towards this point. So you're right in like the center there, the vortex of all Jewish prayers from around the world. By the way, in the Islam, in early Islam, they used to pray towards Jerusalem. And when Muhammad realized that the Jews were not converting to Islam, he changed it to Mecca. Why to Mecca? Because Mecca was already a holy site for the Arabs. It was a pagan site, but it was a holy site, so it was easy to get Mecca. The Kaaba in Mecca used to be a place of idol worship before Islam. So, if he was standing behind the mercy seat, he should imagine himself to be in front of it. Okay, consequently, If he's in the east, he turns to the west. If he's in the west, he turns to the east. If he's in the south, he faces the north, etc. In the north and south. In this way, all of Israel will be turning their hearts towards one place. Rabbi Avin, and some people say Rabbi Avina said, what is the text that can support this idea? It says, Kimigdal David Savarech. This is taken from the Psalms. No, from the Song of Songs. Kimigdal David Savarech. Your neck is like the Tower of David. Banui letalpiot, and it's built like turrets. In Hebrew, talpiot means like a tall building. And talpiot, you can break it up into two parts. Tel means a mountain, and piot are mouths. So it's the mountain that all the mouths are facing. One of the names of Jerusalem is Talpiot. And so it's the mound or the mountain where all the mouths are turned to. It says the elevation towards which all the mouths have turned. So that's Jerusalem. Today there's an area in Jerusalem which is called Talpiot. There's East Talpiot and North Talpiot. Yeah, so, but that's based on this verse in the Song of Songs, the term Talpiot. Okay, so you have this idea that everybody's praying to the same spot. Now, you might say, what is the importance of that? After all, God is everywhere. Why turn towards Jerusalem? Because this is our belief. Israel is called the Holy Land. What does it mean to be a holy land? In Latin, you say terra sancta, which is the Holy Land. In Hebrew, you say Eretz HaKodesh. Now, a little bit of Hebrew etymology, or dikduk. When you say Eretz HaKodesh, Eretz HaKodesh, this doesn't work very pretty well. Is there another one somewhere? That's the only one? What's that? Okay. You say Eretz HaKodesh, oh, it means a little bit different than if you say Eretz HaKedosha. Now, look, Eretz HaKodesh, right? Kodesh is masculine, Kedosha is feminine. So what does Eretz HaKodesh mean? If you want to say Terra Sancta, you have to say Haaretz HaKedosha. That would be Terra Sancta in Hebrew. Once you say Eretz HaKodesh, it doesn't mean the Holy Land. It means the land of the holy. Of meaning belonging to. And if you look in Jeremiah, the holy is a connotation for God. Go'aleinu Hashem tzvaot shemo kadosh Yisrael. Redeem us, O God, of the Lord of the hosts, the holiness of Israel. So one of the connotations for God is the Holy One. So Eretz HaKodesh means God's land. Doesn't mean the Holy Land. In Latin, they say Terra Sancta, the Holy Land. In Hebrew, we say the land of the holy, meaning God's land. So one time, I was in the Israeli Misrad Apnim, the Ministry of the Interior. I don't know, I can't remember what it was for. And so they said to me, says, okay, you study, tell us, what does it mean, Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh? What does it mean, Jerusalem? Now, we translate it normally, the holy city.
They asked you?
Yeah, they asked me what it was. So I said, he says, and because they said to me, Jerusalem is feminine, isn't it? So how come it's Ir HaKodesh? Because Kodesh is masculine. And I told them exactly this, because it doesn't mean Jerusalem, the holy city. It means Jerusalem, God's city. The city of the holy, which is God. That's why it's in the masculine and not in the feminine. So Israel's called God's land, and Jerusalem is called God's city. This you can also find in Deuteronomy chapter 32. So it says, Ki chelik Hashem amo, Yaakov chevel nachlato. For God's portion is his people, and Jacob is his portion of land. So this is mostly about the people, but it also mentions the land. And the land of Israel, of course, is called in Deuteronomy the place where God's eyes are always beholding the land. Tamid einei Hashem Elohecha ba. Always God's eyes are on that land. Mereishit hashana v'ad achrit shana, from the beginning of the year till the end of the year. When it talks about the land of Israel. So what does it mean, God's land? What it actually means is, first of all, it's called the land of prophecy. And in our tradition, and I guess it's easier to connect to God through this land. Why that should be, and I can't answer you, but that's our tradition. So how it works exactly, that's a little bit hard for me to answer that. But according to the Bible, that's what it seems to be. Notice what happens with Abraham. Abraham is walking with his father, with his brothers, and one of his brothers dies on the way, Haran, and then he's with Lot, Haran's son. And only when Abraham comes to the Canaan does God speak to him. Until then, he didn't. Actually, God spoke to him, as he was boarding Canaan, because they left Ur, and they went all the way to Aram, which is Syria, and then God said to him, go to the land, I'll show you. So it's almost like God spoke to him in order to bring him to the land. In other words, I can call you long distance, but I need you to come to the land. So that's what it almost seems here. Look what happens in the book of Jonah. In that little book of Jonah, God says to Jonah, I want you to go to the city of Nineveh, which is in Iraq. Today, that's the city Mosul in Iraq, where ISIS was destroyed. Where ISIS destroyed all the idols, and then they destroyed ISIS there. So, and he says, go to Nineveh, which was the capital city of Assyria, the northern. They were in the north, near the area of Iraq today. And I want you to tell them that in 40 days the city will be destroyed. And I want you to tell them because I want them to repent. Now, Jonah doesn't want to go, if you remember the story, because he doesn't want to hear God's prophecy. Why? Because he doesn't like the Assyrian Empire. And he likes the idea that their capital city. Just understand, the Assyrian Empire were the arch enemies of the northern kingdom of Israel. They had to pay tax to them all the time, every year. They hated them. It's sort of like, today, I don't know if you want to say, if a prophet in Israel would hear that God is going to destroy Tehran, I don't think they would be crying too much. But then if God said, and now go to Tehran, tell them they have to repent so that I won't destroy them. Okay, no, you just destroy them. So, and since God said he's going to destroy Nineveh, the city, in 40 days, so Jonah, who's a nationalist, he says to himself, okay, I'm willing to die, and God has to destroy it because he promised, right? So he gets on a boat and he leaves Israel. Why does he leave Israel? Because he assumed that God doesn't make house calls. You're either in God's land, you listen, you hear the prophecy, or else I'm not going to hear it. So I can say, I didn't hear it, sorry. And what happens with Jonah again? He gets onto a boat, and his boat is going north somewhere. And on the boat, there's a tempest, there's a storm, a terrible storm. And Jonah goes to the bottom of the boat, he goes to sleep. And then the captain of the ship checks through the boat to see who's around. And he says everybody has to pray to their God. And they see this guy who's sleeping downstairs. He says, why are you asleep? You have to get up and start praying to your God. Jonah says, what's the problem? He says, there's a storm. It's about to turn over the ship. And he says, I see. Just throw me in, it'll be over. That's the book of Jonah. And the captain was a nice guy. He didn't want to throw him in. So they said, okay, we'll draw lots. We'll do a lottery. So everybody had to get, and everybody took like a large stick, a small stick. They made a lottery, and the name of Jonah kept coming up in the lottery. They did 2 times, 3 times. Jonah said, I know, it's because of me. Just throw me over. Everything will be over. So they took Jonah, they threw him into the water, and the storm was gone. And if you remember the story, Jonah goes into this is in the 12 minor prophets. He goes down, and there's a big fish comes, swallows him up, and he's in the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. So Jonah knows that he's going to die. It doesn't bother him, because if I die, nobody goes to Nineveh, nobody tells them to repent, and in 40 days, that's the end of them. He's willing to give his life for that. When you keep reading, the story is so interesting. Chapter 2, after 3 days in the belly of the fish, so Jonah's not sure what to do. So finally he prays to God. And he says because the whole time at the beginning, he doesn't. Now, in his prayer to God in chapter 2, it's very interesting to read it. He doesn't say, sorry, I made a mistake. He doesn't say that. He says, I'm in the waters, and the waters are surrounding me. And I know that God is out there. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. And finally, at the end of the prayer, he says, what I said I will do, I will do. And at that moment, the fish spits him out onto dry land. God was waiting him to say that he's going to do what God told him to do. That's okay. He doesn't have to say he's sorry. He doesn't, just do it. That's what happens. In other words, there's no remorse, if you remember. And after he goes to Nineveh, and after the city repents, and then God, of course, is not going to destroy Nineveh anymore. So Jonah goes and protests. He goes outside the city, and he sits there and protests. You didn't destroy the city. I did what you said I should do, but you didn't say what you were supposed to do. But of course, God doesn't have to do it, because if you repent, right? And he sits there, if you remember the story. And then God makes this, and then it becomes really hot, right? If you're in Iraq and it's summertime, it gets really hot. So God creates this plant over, it's called, what do they call it in Hebrew? Henya. He makes this plant grow with big leaves over Jonah. And Jonah is really happy that he has shade under this plant where he's sitting next to the city. And then in the night, God sends a worm, and the worm eats up the plant. And then again, the sun is beating on him. But Jonah doesn't go anywhere. And he says, God, just take my life. I can't take the sun. I'm not going anywhere. God says to Jonah, you seem to care a lot about this plant, but you don't care about the 40,000 people who live in that city. That's the end. That's the end of the story. But the interesting thing about this story, Jonah really thinks that if he leaves the land of Israel, God can't talk to him anymore. And it almost sounds like it's true, because only when this fish spits him out of the sea back onto the land of Israel in Jaffa, then God speaks to him a second time. So it almost sounds like he's correct. If you're not in Israel, God's not going to talk to you, which is interesting. So we have this idea that Israel is God's land. There's a special connection. It's the land of the prophets. And it's also, when you pray towards the land of Israel. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, the great grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, he used to say, wherever I go, I'm going to the land of Israel. He only was there once in his life. But he said, wherever I go to the land of Israel. In other words, that's the center. That's the vortex. So you have, I wanted to mention that here also. Okay, I think that'll be enough for this. I'll say one other thing about prayer before we leave that. In that same tefillah, in that same prayer, where King Solomon, after he builds the first temple, this is Kings 1, chapter 8. So he has his famous oration, or you might say prayer, inaugurating the temple. And this is where he says, and people will pray to this place from all over the world. And he also says, and if a non-Jewish person comes, they can come to this house and pray also. Remember, Isaiah says, Ki beiti beit tefillah yikareh lechol ha'amim. My house is a house of prayer for all nations. So, so that's all part of Solomon's oration, or his prayer at the beginning of the building of the temple. And he says, because in this place you will listen to the rina and the tefillah, which means you'll listen to prayer and you will listen to song. Rina is an unusual word. It's like jubilation, but a vocal type of jubilation. So it says, Lishmo al harina ve'ela tefillah. And the song is rina. It's also the name of the room. Rina. That is this. It's actually very often not with the yud, but sometimes in modern Hebrew we're able to do it too. So if you take it the way this is 200 in Gematria, 250, 265. And this is no, that was, I'm sorry. This is what no, there are two things that I got it wrong. Hold it. Now I got it. The word shira, which is song, comes out of 300, 550. That's what 550. Sorry. And tefillah is 400, 480, 480, 510, 550. In other words, the word shira, which means song, the word tefillah, which means prayer, have the same numerical value. You might say song is a blind movement of the soul. Music makes you move. Like people like to dance when they hear music. There's some people who dance when they don't hear music, but they get in their ear, right? And if they don't, there's probably just something wrong with them. But if they do, right? So music makes you want to move. So it's a movement of the body and the soul. Prayer is just a movement of the soul. So you have shira, tefillah. That's why prayer is very often accompanied with song. It sort of goes together. Prayer is, I would say, a natural mystical side of human beings. That's why we say music, like the Greek word for the muses, right? Like sort of angelic forms. Of course, the Greeks also thought that ideas were produced by the muses. That's why we have museums also. The original museum was basically a collection of people who were scholars who would be in the museum and would think about new ideas. Eventually, it became artifacts, became a museum. So the first one is shira and tefillah. Song and prayer go together because there's some natural connection between them. Because song is a blind movement of the soul, and prayer is a focused movement of the soul. But what is prayer? What are you doing in prayer? Here the Talmud also has an interesting discussion. Talmud says there are two parts of prayer. One of them is called rina, that's that first word, and the other one is called tefillah. Now, the word that we normally use for prayer is tefillah. Tefillah in Hebrew is rukachuna. Now, but what does it mean? In Yiddish, by the way, it's davening. You know, there's a Yiddish word called davening. You can also use it grammatically. Echab gedavend, I did pray already. To daven. It's a word which does not come from German. And but some people think that daven comes from the Latin divine, meaning this is a duty of God, meaning I'm praying to God, divine. That's one possibility. So, and very often you have words that come from the outside and they sort of become corrupted a little bit when they enter the Yiddish language. For instance, I have a Yiddish name. Aside from Raphael, which is a Hebrew name, I have a Yiddish name and named after my late uncle, and his name was Bunim, which is a very unusual name in Yiddish. And Dr. Avshalom Kor, who's an expert in languages, a Jewish languages. He says it comes from the French bon homme. There was actually a movement in Provence in the 13th century, a Christian movement of saints which called themselves bonhomme. So it could be they took it from there, whatever. And again, it became sort of corrupted into Yiddish and became bunim instead of bonhomme. There's another Yiddish name for women, which is yente. Yente is a Yiddish name for women, and it looks like it comes from gentila. Gentila, which is more Spanish. So, yeah, so you have things like that too. But anyhow, getting back to this. So you have Rina and Tefillah. And what is it? So the Talmud has another unusual statement. The Talmud says, why? And this is based on, as I said, this first prayer of Solomon. Solomon says, when somebody will come to this temple, you will listen to their Rina and their Tefillah. So Talmud says, what is Rina? What is Tefillah? What's the difference? The Talmud says, Rina, he says, Rina is Tefillah. I mean, Rina, the word Rina refers to prayer. And Tefillah refers to bakasha, which means request. Meaning there are two things in prayer. There's praying and there's asking for something. Two parts. The only problem is, if you say Rina is Tefillah and Tefillah is bakasha, it sounds like saying A is B and B is C. Then isn't A is also C? So, no, but it doesn't mean that, though. What it means is the word Rina is referring to the part of prayer which is not request. And the word Tefillah is first and foremost referring to request. Now, this is interesting because there's a discussion in the 12th and 13th century. What is the definition of praying? And is it an obligation? Do I pray as an obligation every day? And if so, where does it say that in the Bible? Or do I pray when I feel like it? Now, if you tell people to pray when they feel like it, a lot of them won't pray ever, right? I always say, we are more obviously aware of our bodies than our souls. And the proof is, if you don't eat for a day, you feel miserable. If you didn't pray for a week, you're still okay, right? So we're more in tune with our body than with our souls. So, so what is the definition of prayer, and is it an obligation? Maimonides claims that it isn't a daily obligation. Maybe not. The 3 times a day is rabbinic. As I told you have things from the Bible and things which are rabbinic. It says the 3 times a day that the rabbis came up with to mimic the service in the temple. But from the Torah, you're supposed to pray something every day. Where does he learn it from? He learns it from Deuteronomy 11, on an interpretation of the Midrash Sifri, where it says, and you shall worship God with all your heart. So the Midrash already says before Maimonides, how do you worship God with your heart? That's prayer. So Maimonides says that means that to pray every day is a mitzvah from the Torah. So Maimonides says it's a daily mitzvah, at least from the Torah. The rabbi said to do it 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and evening, which also David mentions in Daniel. Nachmanides, who lives in... I'm sorry?
I pray when I feel.
You can do that too. You can do that too. Then you're doing it more than once. And the question is there a minimum? Nachmanides says that there's no daily obligation.
Yeah.
He says, but there is an obligation to pray when you are in difficult times. He learns that from where it also says, I think it's also in Deuteronomy, it says, in times of war, you shall call out to God and God will help you. So he says, look, it says in times of war, you call out to God, which means it's an obligation to do so. So he learns from this, when a person is in a time of duress, time of difficulty, that's when you call out to God. Now, you might say, okay, but there are no atheists in foxholes, right? When a person is under attack, all of a sudden they discover religion. But the way I understand it is, when you are in time of stress, who do you turn to? Okay? Even if you don't appear to be a religious person, if you turn to God, it means that somewhere down there you are a religious person. So according to Nachmanides, that's Moses ben Nachman, he says that's the Torah obligation, rabbinically 3 times a day. Maimonides says, no, every day there's at least. Now this is interesting because it means, at least according to Nachmanides, that prayer is a request. Because if the obligation from the Torah is to pray when you're in times of stress, so we know what you're praying for. You're praying for your life. You're praying to get out of the problem. It could be maybe your whole financial life collapsed and you don't know what to do when you pray, but you're asking for something. So it sounds like human beings, first and foremost, they pray to God because they want something. But that's okay. But there's another aspect to prayer, which is called rina, which is not about asking for something.
Yeah.
That's true, but there's even something else. I'm not disagreeing. I'll get back to the thankful because it is actually part of the structure of our prayer service. But it's the connection. It's about having a connection. What you were talking about, I told you the silent 18 benedictions is the main part of the prayer service, morning, afternoon, and night. The way the 18 benedictions work, today they're 19, the first 3 are adoration, praise. The last 3 are gratitude or thanksgiving. The middle are requests. All the requests in the silent prayer are general requests for plenty of rain, for the ingathering of the exiles, for the building of Jerusalem, for people be healthy, right? All the general things for everybody, the collective. And private prayers are places we can add it in. But first you have to know to ask for everybody. So you have to be part of the collective. But aside from that, there's the idea of the connection. And the higher level of prayer is to want to be connected to God. To be connected to God means I want to have in my realization that God is in my life. There's a story, there were 2 guys, their name are Reuben and Shimon, right? Like the 2 first sons of Jacob, Reuben and Shimon, and Simon. And both of them were rabbis. But everybody used to come to Reuben to ask questions, and nobody used to come to Shimon. One day Shimon comes over to Reuben, he says, Reuben, we went to school together, we studied together, same academy. How come everybody goes to you and nobody goes to me? Reuben says, that's because I can read minds. So Shimon says, okay, what am I thinking at this moment? Reuben says, at this moment, you're thinking of the verse in Psalms, I place God before me at every moment. Shimon says, I wasn't thinking about that right now. Reuben says, that's why nobody goes to you. Yeah, okay. So, but this idea of the connection, what's the idea of the connection? I always compare it to how a man and a woman use a telephone. A man gets on a telephone, it doesn't matter if he calls a man or a woman. He wants information. Okay, he's on the phone, he gets the information, thank you very much. That's the way a man uses a telephone. A woman calls up a friend. Hi, how you doing? Good, good. So what's new? I don't know, this goes on and on. And then after one moment, I'll be right back. I forgot something in the oven. Yeah, so yeah, and we were saying, and this will go on for a while. And no information has to be passed. It can be I'm talking about this and this and that. But it's just about the connection. The longer we're on the phone means I like you. If I don't have time for you, I don't like that. It's not what we say, it's what we feel, right? So that it's a connection. So it's not about, like a man calls up a woman and she likes him. And he says, okay, so I was just wanting to know, could you remind me then? Yeah, no problem. Bye. So where are you going? Nowhere really. I'm just sitting at my desk. Tell me something else. Okay. So that's called prayer between Rina and Fila. Right? So you can ask God for something, but then you can say, you know what? I like this connection. I want to say a psalm. I want to Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Okay, when it muted everything. I didn't understand. Okay, thank you. Okay, so what we were saying before is that sometimes, yeah. So the Dalai Lama once said that it's a good thing that God doesn't give you everything you ask for because sometimes we don't know if we're asking for the right thing or not. Right. And there was the second thing was, oh yeah, so the story about the seer of Lublin. That was Yaakov Yitzchak of Lublin, one of the students of the Magi de Mezrich, a student of the Baal Shem Tov. So there's a story that this woman comes to him. He was known as a miracle. Hasidim are into miracle man. The Lithuanian rabbis, not so much. Okay. So comes to the Choser, this lady comes to the Choser and says, my son is not well, and I need you to pray for him. Choser says, why don't you pray for him? It's okay, I can pray for him, but you pray for him. It's different. So, you're the Choser. So he starts thinking for a moment. He says, okay, that'll be 55 rubles. He says, 55 rubles? It takes me 3 months to make 55 rubles. It's a lot of money. So the seer says, that's the price. 55 rubles, you pay it or I don't do it. He says, I'm not going to pay 55 rubles. I'm going to pray by myself. Thank you. But no, thank you. She goes away. And then one of his students is sitting around. He says, Rabbi Yitzchak, you never asked for money before. What's going on? He said, well, I wanted her to say what she said at the end. She doesn't realize I can't pray for her if she doesn't. I can pray with her. I can't pray instead of her. Right. It's like if somebody's sick in the hospital and they're praying for themselves, if all their friends get in, there's even research that's been done on that. People who they pray on your behalf, that they claim that it creates, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, placebo, whatever, and they seem to have better odds than will, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, whatever you want to call it. One time I saw this group in at near the dead, facing the Dead Sea. There's what's called Nachal Arugot. There's a waterfall there called Nachal David, whatever. And there were groups of people, and there was this evangelical Christian group, and they all had their hands on some woman's head, look, and praying in a circle. So I watched for a while, and then they broke up, and I said, one guy said, "What are you doing?" He says, "We're praying because she's not feeling well." I says, "Oh, very nice." And he says to me, "What's your name?" He says, "My name's Raphael." Says, "What does that mean?" He says, "It means God heals." What? He says, he brings the woman over. He says, "You got to say a prayer for her too." And yeah, that was funny. Okay, so let's get back to this. This all began with this idea that there are two parts to prayer. Prayer itself is a very interesting thing, but it's interesting that how Jewish law also tries to put everything into categories of the legal system. Because if you want people to pray, there has to be an obligation. I'll tell you something else interesting. My father was a rabbi in Montreal, Canada for over 50 years. And across the street, there were two bisericas. Next, one of them was Baptist, I think, and the other one was Catholic, French Catholic. And so one time we invited the priest to come to the synagogue to show them around. So they look at the synagogue. They said, how does it work? He says, well, you can see the women are sitting on the side. They have like ramp, sort of like, and the men are in the middle. And in the front, you have the cantor who leads the services. And he says, I also sit up there on the Sabbath. He says, and how's the service work? He says, well, we need 10 men. We need a quorum of 10 men, and then we can start the service. And so the priest says, and the Catholic priest says, and if you don't have 10 men, you can't start the service. And then what happens? You can't start the service without 10 men. Thinks for a moment, says, that's ingenious. Because in my church, I get all women. I can never get the men to come. You solved it. Without the 10 men, you can't start. So they have to be there. That was fun. But it's interesting because women tend to be more spiritual. And you can just see, how many women are in prisons and how many men are in prisons. In Israel, we have one prison for women, we have a few for men. So I guess that seems to be something universal. Okay, let's go on to another topic. I will open up now. Again, because there were things I wanted to finish, but I always find these discussions interesting about tefillah.
It's also the feminine, the
Tefillah is on the feminine, yes. Yes.
and Kodesh, no?
Kedusha.
Kodesh.
Yeah, Kodesh, no, yeah, what we said before.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, we did a little bit of Cain and Abel. I want to say one other thing about Cain and Abel in our discussion yesterday. The Talmud in Sanhedrin discusses about what it says. Why does it say in the verse in chapter 4, Kol demei achicha tzoakim alai min ha'adamah? The voice of your brother's bloods, and it's in the plural, are screaming to me from the ground, meaning after you kill them. Your brother's blood is screaming to me from the ground, God says to Cain. But it's in the plural. So the Talmud says, why is it in the plural? To tell you that when you kill a person, you're killing all the generations that can come forth from that person. So it's like you killed the whole world. By the way, sometimes Muslims also quote this from the Quran. It says in the same thing in the Quran, if you kill one person, if you kill the whole world. The other thing is they don't quote the whole quote in the Quran. The quote in the Quran starts like this. And I said to the people of Israel, if you kill one person, it's as if you killed the whole. They forgot the first part. By the way, many, many places in the Quran, it says, and I told the people of Israel this, and I told the people of Israel this. It's very, very common. And not only that, in the Quran, it says at least 5 places that God gave the land of Israel to the people of Israel. At least in 5 places. And when you say that today to a Muslim, they say, that's right. He says, so? I said, but you're not the people of Israel, you're the Jews. Really, that's their answer. You're Al-Yahud, you're not Israel. You have to explain to them that Al-Yahud means from the children of Judah, and Judah was a son of Israel. They just don't know that part, or they pretend not to know that part. Yeah, but they really think that way. That's the way they teach. So that the people who are,
Most of them don't.
they don't know. They don't know. Okay, let's read this. This is another midrash about Abraham. I want to say a few things about this because there are ways of interpreting it. This is a midrash on the perikop of Lech Lecha, where Abraham is told by God, go from your father's house, from where you were born, which of course was Babylonia, Ur, Iraq of today, and go to the land which I will show you. But the interesting thing is, before God speaks to Abraham, he doesn't speak to Abraham. Meaning, Abraham, however old he was at the time, according to Maimonides, he was 40. But however, before that, God had not spoken to him. And all of a sudden, God speaks to him and doesn't say, I'm the God of your fathers, like with Moses. And I heard what happened. There's no introduction. God says, Abraham, go from your go to the land of Canaan, right? And to the land I'll show you. That's it. No introductions. So the Midrash is wondering, like, what is this all about? Why is there no introduction? So, Rabbi Isaac commenced his discourse. You can see this on. Hearken, O daughter, and consider. Rabbi Isaac said, this can be compared to a man or a person who was traveling from one place to another, and he saw a building in flames. You see that? Abraham Lech Lecha. Says Lech Lecha. So this can be compared to a person who was traveling from place to place, and he saw a building in flames. Now the Hebrew word for flames is for a building is birah, which actually means a palace, a very large building, a palace. And for flames, it says doleket. Now, modern Hebrew doleket would be in flames, but it could also mean some people translated is lit up, which means there were candles and didn't have electricity, but in every room there were candles, so the whole building was lit up. Doleket, meaning the lights were on. It could be this way or that way. Most interpretations say he saw a lit up palace. And he said, is it possible that this building lacks a person? Now, again, this translation is based on how he translates that one word. So first I'll give you the way it's usually understood. It's understood like this. He says, can it be that this building is all lit up and it lacks somebody to look after it? And then the owner of the building, meaning God, looked out and said, I'm the owner of the. Similarly, Abraham said, is it conceivable that the world is without a God? And God said, looked up and said, I'm the God, I'm the sovereign of the universe. In other words, Abraham, before he got to that point that God spoke to him, was thinking about, he turned away from the idols of his father, Terach, and his brother, Haran, and Nahor, his brother Nahor. And he came to the understanding there must be only one God, and then God speaks to him. This is the understanding of Maimonides, and most of the commentaries, the Midrash also understands it this way. Maimonides actually says from the age of 3 till the age of 40, he was looking for God until God appeared to him. But this idea of this, a man who's traveling, meaning he's traveling in life, he keeps seeing buildings that are lit up, and he wonders if it's lit up, it must have somebody in the building, right? So if this world is put together so in such an intelligent way, there's got to be somebody in charge of the building. And then God speaks to him and says, yes, go to Canaan, and then we'll talk more. Okay. So that's this story. The question is, what does the story mean? So as I say, there are a few ways to interpret. Number one is, what does the word doleket mean? What does it mean lit up? Does it mean lit because there were candles? Does it mean in flames, like he said? Or does it mean something else? There's even a third interpretation, doleket, from the Hebrew word lidlok, which means to run after. To run after. So the first one I just explained. The candles lit up. So obviously, if their candles lit, somebody's in charge of this house. So, and then God peeks out the window and says, yes, Abraham, go to the land of Canaan, etc. Right? That's the connection to why it's on this verse. The second one is an interpretation by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who used to be the chief rabbi of Great Britain. He likes the translation that it's in flames, which means, and this also connects what I'm going to talk about on Monday. He says, to be a religious person means to respond to the fact that the world is incomplete, that there is evil in the world. Abraham realizes the world's in flames. There's evil, there's theft, there's killing, there's rape. Things are happening evil in the world, and it bothers him. Because once you believe in the one God, it's all about believing in the God's commandments, and it's immutatio Dei. You want to do things that God does in the Bible. God sees Adam and Eve and gives them clothing. God visits Abraham when he's sick, according to the Talmud. So the idea of to be a religious person, first and foremost, is to understand that there is the other. There is a Jewish French philosopher by the name of Emmanuel Levinas. He was actually born in Lithuania at the beginning of the 19th century. He studied with Edmund Husserl, the phenomenologist in Germany, between the wars, and he was actually he actually also studied with Heidegger, which after the war he was shocked that Heidegger supported the Nazi party. That's how he got through the war. But they were existentialists and phenomenologists. So he once said on the verse, in the New Testament it says, in the name of Jesus, that there are two things which are the most important. One is love your the Lord your God, and the other one is love your neighbor as yourself. In the book of Leviticus, it's written differently. It says, love your neighbor as yourself, I am God. There's a little ending, I am God. So Levinas says, what does that mean? What does it mean, love your neighbor as yourself, I am God? So he says, in order to love your neighbor, you have to realize that there's somebody else out there aside from you, which means you have to have the ability to leave your egocentricity and to hear the cry of somebody else. It's not an easy thing to do. If you're able to do that, and by the way, in Hebrew, compassion, rachamim, compassion, is the same, comes from the same root as the word rechem, which is a womb. Just like a woman carries a child in the womb, meaning she learns to include somebody else within her life. So the word for compassion means to include another person within my life, to realize that they have problems too. So Levinas says, why does it say, I am the Lord, love your neighbor as yourself, I am God? To teach you that only if you're able to break out of your egocentricity and hear the cry of somebody else, then are you able to connect with God too. Because if you're stuck in your own little world and there's nobody else but you, then you're not interested in God either. It's all connected. That's living us. So getting back to this, Rabbi Sachs says, this is the beginning of the religious mentality. The religious mentality is based on the idea of ethics. It was Immanuel Kant who talked a lot about the idea of a person being having an autonomous relationship to a morality. He termed it, I'm trying to think of the term he used for it. I can't remember the term he used in Latin for being self-motivated. In other words, a person has to be self-motivated for morality. He wrote another book which was called the Prolegomena to any fruit. Oh, let me put it this way. According to Kant, morality is something that everybody knows, but you can't prove it because it's a priori. Just like geometry, everybody knows that the quickest way between 2 points is a straight line. You can prove it, but you know it before you prove it. Everybody knows that 2 parallel lines will never meet, even though there's no way to prove it. Because if these are infinite parallel lines, how can I prove that something which is infinite will never meet? Maybe somewhere down the line it'll meet, but I know it won't because by definition it's parallel. So it can't ever meet. Unless you're talking about non-Euclidean geometry. But in Euclidean geometry, it can never meet. So there's certain things, just like you have things which are the term in geometry is help me out. Things that we know to be true. I forgot the word at the moment. Thank you. Axiomatic. So morality is a priori, which means if you have the concept of the sanctity of life, then you won't kill somebody. And the reason you won't kill somebody is not because if I kill them, they might kill you. Because according to that thinking, if I was Superman and there was no kryptonite, so they can't kill me, so I can just kill them, right? No. But still, morality would say, no, you cannot. So the trying to figure out the reasons for morality will always bring it down a peg. Why can't you steal? Well, if I start stealing from you, you can steal from me. But let's say I couldn't steal from you because, I don't know, you're the type of guy I don't want to steal from. It's too dangerous. Does that mean then you can't steal? No. So a priori means I understand the problem. So Kant thought it was a rational idea, but there was no real way to prove it. It's something that somebody is born with. That's the idea. A priori, it comes prior. It's knowledge. It's prior to knowledge that people can know these things. Then he has another book called the Prolegomena to any future metaphysics, because Kant had a problem with the metaphysics of the Middle Ages. And in his Prolegomena to any future metaphysics, he says the only thing that we can do if we want to try to prove that metaphysics might exist is look at human beings. Why do they do the right thing? Why do they help that old person cross the street? Why do they want to help a handicapped person? Why would I want to give money to a beggar? I need money too. Maybe tomorrow I'll need it. Why do I want to do it? Why would I do anything that's going to compromise my opinion, my ability to gain more? Right? If in life I have to gain and gain, why would I give something to anybody? So obviously, Kant says, it's because you have this a priori thing. But why do you have the a priori thing? Because obviously human beings believe in the summum bonum. They believe that they're going to get some type of reward in another world. So he said, if this is true psychologically, then we obviously were created with the belief in an afterlife. That's in his Prolegomena. So he says, this is a sort of a proof that this is the way that we were actually created, the belief in some type of an afterlife. That's, by the way, because of that, Kant had a problem with Judaism because he read the Hebrew Bible, and the Hebrew Bible doesn't talk about the world. And Kant didn't understand, why does the Hebrew Bible not talk about the world to come? That's the whole point. Right? Paradise, that's the whole point. It's interesting. The truth is that in Judaism, he wasn't familiar with the Talmud. The Talmud does talk about these things, because I told you, in Judaism, there's the written text and there's the interpretive text, and both of them we consider part of the canon. But if you read the written text, you're right. Rabbi Kook has a very interesting proposal to explain that. He says, if the written Bible, the Hebrew Bible, were to say, be a good person in order to have a place in the world, you've just shot yourself in the leg. Because what are you saying? You're saying to give charity is a wonderful thing. It's an amazing commandment to honor your parents as a way. But now you're saying, but if you do it, you'll get a place in the world to come. Wait a sec. If you're going to give me a prize, okay, I'll do it for the prize. So I don't really think that honoring my parents is important. I don't think helping the sick is important. I want the prize. So by offering a prize, you're now belittling what you just said. You're saying it's worthless if not for the prize. Take an American film. In American film, there's always a hero. So let's say there's a city, and the city is fighting these monsters, okay? And everybody likes monsters from outer space today. And some guy comes by, some Rambo, and he fights against the monsters, and he saves the city of 500,000 people. And of course, in a good American film, they'll say, thank you, thank you. How can we thank you? He'll say, I was just doing my job, right? That's what we want to hear in American film. But let's say instead of saying that, he says, you want to thank me? Okay, how about $1.5 million to do a little collection? And that'll ruin everything, right? Because this guy was a hero. All he wanted was $1.5 million. Like, that's not a hero. We want real heroes, okay? So if the Bible were to say, you can have a world place in the world to come and whatever, you just ruined it. Okay, the Talmud can tell us this time you will get the reward. But the Mishnah says, do not be like servants who serve the master in order to have a reward. Do it for its own sake. That's called doing out of love.
You also do not be in the present. So you're all the time living.
Exactly. You have to live in the present. You have to be in the present. God's name, by the way, is, we call in Hebrew, Shem Havaya, the name of the present. The name of the present. Okay. So according to Rabbi, according to this interpretation, the world in flames, it means to respond, to be an ethical person, moral person is to respond and to say, we've got to change things. It can't be like this. And it's to take the world seriously. Because if I only care about the world to come, I don't care about this world. I don't have to take it seriously. It's like in Buddhism. The world is full of pain. Nothing I can do about it. So the most I can do is escape. Right? Moksha, nirvana. I can escape. But the world is full of pain. Nothing you can do about it. So, okay. The third interpretation is a Hasidic interpretation by the Rebbe of Gur. That's a city in Poland, not too far from Warsaw, called Góra Kalwaria today. Rebbe of Gur, he lived at the end of the 19th century. The end of the 19th century. In the 1880s, he wrote his books called Sfat Emet. And on this, he brings this midrash, and he explains it differently. He says, it doesn't mean the candles were lit. It doesn't mean that it was in flames. It means that everybody's running after something. Dolek, from the word to run. In other words, Abraham was looking at the world, and he saw everybody's running after something. And he was trying to figure out what the something is. And he realized, according to the Rebbe of Gur, that something is something within their own soul. They think it's out there, but it's actually in here. And when Abraham realized that it's not out there, it's in here, that's when God appeared and said, I need you now to go to Canaan. So he has a whole different interpretation, takes it out there. He's very much into that. The people are running and running, and they don't realize they're running towards themselves because they're physically running. Yeah. Okay, so that was, I wanted to talk about that one with Abraham and Lech. Okay. Okay, I want to end off by, just like we have, again, we have two types of literature. We have biblical scripture, sanctified text, and we have the oral tradition in its three parts, if you remember. And this becomes written down for the first time from the year 200, and then the whole Talmud is put together between 500 and 600. And of course, there are commentaries and commentaries on commentaries until the Code of Jewish Law is formulated in the 16th century, becomes actually a legal text of how to do. But the Talmud is the interpretive text, which is part of the code itself, because even the rabbinic additions are considered Judaism. There was a book that came out in the 13th century called the Zohar. Now, there's a lot of discussion, especially in academia, about the book of Zohar. And in a moment, you'll understand why I'm mentioning it. The Zohar was attributed to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Shimon Bar Yochai is a second century scholar who's mentioned in the Mishnah, and he's a student of Rabbi Akiva. Now, the Zohar, aside from having interpretations, just like the Midrash, on every perikopa, also has, sometimes mentions Jewish law. And the question was, if the Zohar mentions Jewish law, does it have any bearing on Jewish law? This question was asked in the 16th century by Joseph Karo, who was the one who wrote the Code of Jewish Law in Sfat in the 16th century. And it was asked before him by his uncle, Yitzchak Karo, who lived in Egypt. Who lived in Spain. Joseph Karo went from Spain to Saloniki, and then from Saloniki to the land of Israel after the expulsion. So his uncle lived in Spain. And Joseph Karo wonders if there's something, let's say there's something in the Zohar which conflicts with the Talmud. If the Zohar is written by Shimon Bar Yochai, maybe it's a good source. So right away, Joseph Karo is nervous about this. So he says, if it conflicts with the Talmud, the answer is no. Because the Talmud already made decisions based on many sages, so there's no reason why one sage should change everything. However, he says, but my uncle, Yitzchak Karo, said, if the Talmud left something in a stalemate, and there was no decision after the argument, then if the Zohar holds one of the positions, you can use the Zohar to affirm that position. Okay, at the moment it sounds like, okay, that sounds logical. I'll explain to you why it's troublesome. Let's say you want to use the book of Zohar for halachic reasons. Most halachic authorities would say, why? What's wrong with the Talmud, right? Now, if you say, look, obviously if it's against the Talmud, you don't use it. However, in such and such case, I can use it. If you're going to say that, is it because you want to use the Zohar or you want to limit the use of the Zohar? That's my question. Is it because you want to use it or you don't want to use it and that's why you want to limit it? Understand my question?
Yes, I think you don't want to use it.
I would say the opposite. Because nobody was using it until then. Or almost nobody. So once you say only in this case, you want to make sure the ones who disagree will say, okay, in that case, it's okay. You understand what I'm saying? If you limit it to a little niche, then even the ones who disagree with you, you're hoping they're going to say, okay, that's the trick. In other words, Yitzchak Karo wanted to use the Zohar, but he knew that the rabbis would be against if it conflicts with the Talmud. So he says, no, not when it conflicts with the Talmud, only in cases where it doesn't. But it's because he wants to use it. Right. And I will tell you that according to the late Professor Israel Tashma, who was a scholar, Talmudic scholar, passed away about 15 years ago. So he said that Joseph Caro used the Zohar in his code of Jewish law more than anybody who came before him, since the Zohar was discovered in the 13th century. Okay, so in other words, he understood from his uncle that they want to use it, not that they didn't want, because you can also bring the Zohar not only when there's an argument in the Talmud, you can bring it when it adds things. There are many places where it adds things. Okay, so he brings it actually more than anybody else.
So this is how it became so popular?
No, that's how it became popular in legal cases. Because you had other opinions, for instance, like the Maharshal Shlomo Luria, who also lives in the 16th century, is a contemporary of Joseph Caro and also contemporary of Moses Isserlich, the Ashkenazic one who writes in the Code of Jewish Law together with Joseph Caro. And he lived in Lublin at the exact same time. And he understood that Joseph Caro was using the Zohar in his Code of Jewish Law. And he writes in his responsa that you cannot use the Zohar for Jewish law. And he says, besides, in the Talmud, when there's an argument between Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Judah, the law always follows Rabbi Judah, not Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So even if the Zohar is written by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, it should be irrelevant to Jewish. So it says, and not only that, but even if Shimon Bar Yochai would come back from the grave and stand right in my face and say, I wrote the book and the law is according to me, say, sorry, that's not the way Jewish law works. That's Shlomo Luria of Lublin. So the argument went on. Yeah. Normally, Ashkenazic authorities do not pay attention to Kabbalistic literature when it comes to Jewish law, except for the Hasidim. Today, Hasidim seems to be a lot of Ashkenazic Jewry. Remember, it's only 200 years old. And in Judaism, 200 years is like a blink of the eye, right? So most Ashkenazic, as I said, commentaries don't use any Kabbalistic sources for Jewish law. But why am I mentioning all this? Because some people not only saw the Zohar as being associated with Shimon Bar Yochai, which according to the narrative it is, but they also thought maybe this is part of the official rabbinic literature, which I called you, it's called the Chazal literature of our sages. And if it's part of the official literature, and that's why I'm using it for Jewish law, so it's like the oral tradition, even though it was only discovered in the 13th century. So that's why when we discuss the oral tradition, there are those who see the Zohar as part of that tradition. There are those who disagree also. But even among Ashkenazic authorities like the Vilna Gaon, who didn't officially use the Zohar for Jewish law at all, he still thought the Zohar could be seen as part of rabbinic tradition because it's associated with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And even if there are parts of it which are obviously later, he didn't have a problem with that, saying that. But even so, if it starts with him, so that's why I just have to mention this, because what would it mean to say that the Zohar or the Kabbalah in general is part of the tradition? What does that mean? I think I brought here, maybe you can see it. Can tell you in a nutshell. I just want to see if I have something here which I wanted to show you. The Kabbalah predates the Zohar, right? Kabbalistic tradition. It starts with the beginning of the 12th century, whereas the Zohar only appears in the 13th century. The only question is whether the Zohar is an old document. If you want me to go into that question, it'll take a little bit of time, but I'll try to do it as quickly as possible. If I don't finish what I want to do today, I'll continue on. When the Zohar appeared in the 13th century, it was already a question. People started asking, where did it come from? Now we know who wrote it. It was written, copied by and discovered by Moses de Leon. Moses de Leon, in around the year 1280, or in the 1280s, his claim is he discovered a manuscript, and then the question is, where did this manuscript come from? But in the manuscript, there is a narrative. There's this Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai who, on his deathbed, gives the Zohar to his students, and his Rabbi Abba, one of his students, writes it down. That's according to the narrative of the Zohar. In the narrative of the Zohar, there are other people. There are visions that they see. There's one vision where they see Moses, who's called the faithful shepherd. There's another vision of a child who tells them something else. There are all these parts of the Zohar. There's a whole part of the Zohar called Raya Mehemna, which is what they heard from the faithful shepherd, etc. The Zohar is actually a collection of literature. I'm sorry? Yeah, so that's why today in academia we refer to it as the zoharic literature, and we don't call it the book anymore. So people tend to call it the book of Zohar, but it's actually, as you said, there are at least 7 parts of the Zohar. You have Zohar and Zohar Chadash, and then you have Sefer Din Tzniuta, which is a small part, but it is its own book. It's called Safra. Then you have Idra Rabbah and Idra Zuta. Then you have Tikkunei Zohar and Tikkunei Zohar Chadash. We're already up to 7. And I think you also have Sitrei Torah, but at least 7 books, as you said, which are all combined together in some way. When the Zohar came out, I didn't know that we'd go into this, but when the Zohar came out, there was a student of Nachmanides. Nachmanides had died at this point. He died in 1270 in Jerusalem. And he had a student whose name was Isaac of Acre, who met him in his last 7 years when he lived in Jerusalem, because he was from Girona in Spain. And after he had this, he was asked by James of Aragon to have an inter-religious controversy with a Jew who had turned to Christianity by the name of Pablo Cristiani. And supposedly he did very well in presenting his point of view. James said to him, this was very interesting, but unfortunately I have to ask you to leave Spain now. So Maimonides got the hint, and he went to Jerusalem, and he lived there his last 7 years. There he met a fellow named Isaac of Acre. Isaac of Acre, after Maimonides died, he went to Italy, and he went to look for manuscripts and talk to people in Italy. And then he heard about the book of Zohar, which had come out in 1281, and he wanted to find out more about the book. Who wrote the book? Where did it come from? So he goes to Spain, and he meets in the city of Valladolid, which is a large city in Castilla. He meets Moses de Leon, who is the one who discovered the Zohar. And he says to me, where does this book come from? Because he said, I met different people. Some people say to me that there was a manuscript that you found, but other scholars are telling me that there was no manuscript, but you used a special magical name of God called Shema Kotev, and you got this divine revelation of this book from Shimon Bar Yochai. He says, which one is true? He says that. So he says, Moses did, and this brought in his diary, which was brought in his diary in a book from the late 16th century by Zakut, his name, Moshe Zakuta. So it's quoting this diary. So Moses de Leon swears to him. He says, "No, I swear to you, I have a manuscript, and come to my hometown in Avila, and I'll show you the manuscript." So it's great. So Moses de Leon goes towards his house, and in the meantime, Isaac Avaker is planning to go there. But then a few days later, he gets the news that Moses de Leon, on the way home, died. He died. This must have been 1290 already, because he died in 1290. So he says, "Oh no, how am I going to find out?" So he goes to Avila, and he goes to the house of Moshe de Leon. He wants to find out, and he meets one of the close students of Moshe de Leon, or somebody who knew him very well. This Joseph Picorno. It's all there in the diary, and he says, "I spoke to Moses de Leon. He claimed that there was a manuscript. What do you think?" Man said, "No manuscript." He says, "What do you mean?" He says, "I did a test." He says, "What was the test?" He said, "I went to the widow, Moshe de Leon, and I went to the daughter. I sent my wife, and I said to her, tell Mrs. de Leon, who is now in poverty because her husband left her nothing. He used to give all his money to charity. Say, I have a son, and I want my son to marry her daughter, and she'll have as much money and as much clothing and food as she ever needs her whole life. All I want is the manuscript of the Zohar." And say the same thing to the daughter and see how they react. And he said, when my wife came back, she said both of them told her that there was no manuscript, that he wrote it himself. So he said he heard that and he felt terrible, but at least, okay, I know now that people who say that he did it with a magical name, that must have been the way. And then he bumps into another guy. And this other guy says, no, he definitely had a manuscript. He says, how do you know? He says, well, one time I took my manuscript of the Zohar and I told Moses de Leon that one of the pages got missing. And I said to him, can you write up the pages again? He says, what pages? And he says, I told him which page, what was the beginning, what was the end? And he gave me the new copy, and the new copy was exactly like the old one. He said, that's not a proof, because maybe first he wrote it down and then he copied from what he wrote down. That's not a proof. And he says, so it seemed to me there was no manuscript. And then it continues. Then he bumped into another guy. Another guy says, no, I was very close to Moshe de Leon. They're definitely, and he says, and I can tell you that I know 100% that, and that's the end of the diary. It's cut off there. We don't know the end. So we don't know what this guy was going to say, but it sounds like he was going to say manuscript, but we don't know. So but the interesting thing is that there was an argument already in the lifetime of Moses de Leon whether there was a manuscript that somehow had survived, or maybe he collected, or was it something which was received in some type of divine. It's interesting that nobody thought it was a forgery, because they all thought the book was unusually interesting. Okay, so none of the people who knew them at the time used that term, which is very interesting. But I'm saying in the academic world, there are all different points of view. And by the way, it's an ongoing. There was the question of whether it's different people wrote it in Spain, one of them being Moses de Leon, whether one of the latest theories of Ronit Meroz is that there are layers to the Zohar, earlier layers and later layers, which makes a lot of sense, etc. So that
It seems to be too complicated to be written by a single man.
That's very possible. That's very possible. It is possible. It was a collection of all different manuscripts that were put together by Moses. That's also possible. It's very possible. Okay, so why do I bring all this? I bring all this because if we're discussing the idea of the oral tradition, is it part of the oral tradition, yes or no? So who says yes? Moses de Leon. If you look in your your books here, I have here a quote.
Started it.
No, he didn't actually. The Kabbalah predates
Yes,
still young.
he started,
No, but it predates him by 150 years at least. So where did it go? I just
really quick, he started.
don't understand. Where did this go? It's just here. Hold on. Give me a minute. Here it is. It says Shekel HaKodesh, Rabbi Moses de Leon, 13th century Spain. This is a book that he wrote before the Zohar came out. By the way, one of the interesting things is some of the things that he writes in his books are not the same as found in the Zohar, which is also interesting. In other words, which could prove that, of course, it could prove to both things. In other words, that some of whatever he either got in manuscript or received in revelation, if that happened, some of the things are not the same in the books that he wrote himself, which is interesting. Like this book, Shekel HaKodesh. But anyhow, in that book, in the introduction, he says, the order of reality is revealed through this awe-inspiring wisdom, which is the basis of all wisdoms and is referred to as Kabbalah, literally to receive. For it is a tradition from Moses at Sinai. Right away, he's considering the Kabbalah an oral tradition from Moses at Sinai, just like the illegal tradition. And it was passed on to Joshua, and Joshua to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, and the prophets of the men of the great assembly in the Second Temple period, just like the tradition of the Torah, meaning the oral Torah, because the written we know, meaning just like the tradition of the oral Torah. And this statement he just made is in the beginning of the Ethics of the Fathers. It starts off with the statement that Moses got the oral Torah from God and gave it to Joshua, and Joshua to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, and the prophets, etc. However, so according to Moses de Leon, the Kabbalah originates at Sinai, just like the part one of the oral tradition, but it was never written down. What happened at Sinai, what the oral tradition was written down at the beginning in the year 200 of the Common Era. Then it was written down more in 500, and it became the Talmudic literature, or what we call the Chazal literature, or the rabbinic literature. However, this oral tradition of the Kabbalah was never written down until the 13th century. That's the argument. Okay. But now look what he says. However, the truth is that this wisdom was given to Adam when he entered the Garden of Eden, and he received this secret knowledge, and it was with him until he left Eden, when he was banished from Eden. And when Adam died, it was inherited by his third son, Seth, Cain, Abel, and Seth, right? About whom the verse says he was born in his image, the image of Adam. Then it was revealed to Noah, the saintly one, who passed it on to his son, Shem, who passed it on to his descendant, Abraham, our father. And through this wisdom, he served God and kept his laws and commandments. And Abraham passed it to Isaac, and Isaac to Jacob, and Jacob to his sons, until the later generation stood at Sinai. Then it was given to Moses, as I said above. And it went from there, it passed from person to another for generations. But in the exile, with all the suffering, this wisdom was forgotten except by unique individuals who pursued this wisdom in every generation. Therefore, it is a tradition from one person to another. All the Torah, written or verbal, is based on this wisdom. So not only is it part of the Torah, it's the basis of everything else. Now, if you notice here, though, he's really saying two different things. First, he says that the origin is with Moses. Then he says the origin is with Adam. Now, this vive la différence, because there's a difference if you say the origin is Moses or you say the origin is Adam. If you say the origin is Moses, so it's part of the Torah was given to the people of Israel. If you say the origin is Adam, Adam wasn't Jewish. Neither was he an Israelite. Neither was Noah. Neither was Noah's son Shem. And if in the simple meaning of the thing, even Abraham was a Hebrew. He wasn't an Israelite. That was Jacob's children, right? He's part of the family, but I mean. So the way he describes it is two different ways, which each one can be interpreted differently. Was the Kabbalah supposedly given to the people of Israel, Sinai? Or was the Kabbalah tradition given to the whole world as a mystical tradition? If you say it was given to Adam, that means it was given to mankind. Even if you say it was given to Noah, it was given to mankind. Now it's true, when you look around at the mystical traditions on this globe, there are a lot of things very similar. Everybody with their emphasis and their cultural differences, but yeah, if you look at, let's say, Hinduism, if you look at Buddhism, you can find things that are similar to certain traditions in the Kabbalah, especially what we call ecstatic Kabbalah. Things that you can find among Chinese ideas. Early Taoism and even the way they see the body can also be a lot of things connected to Kabbalah. So the point is that, so if there are things which are similar, well, that would make sense if Adam and Noah got these secrets, of course, and then every culture would have interpreted it differently. But if you say Moses, so how did they get it? So he brings both, which is interesting. It's almost like he sort of connects them by saying, and then eventually it was Moses and Sinai. But even if you say that, you're talking about a universal tradition, which was also given at Sinai. So you can say, yes, what was given at Sinai was a different format because every culture gets it a different way. So obviously, as the people of Israel, we like to think we got the best way. But the point is, other traditions were found by other people because, yeah, I just wanted to point that out. The way Moses de Leon himself sees the Kabbalistic tradition. What I'd like to do at this point, but we can hold it till Monday. I wanted to read one part of the Zohar. I also wanted to read something, maybe I'll do that for the last part of our discussion right now. There always were, and this I'm going back now, where it says Talmud in Chagiga, because I'm going back to the Talmud. Already in the Mishnah has a concept of the secrets of the Torah, which means that even if you're not going to call it Kabbalah, in Mishnaic thinking of the 2nd century, Judaism has a set of secrets. And the question is then, is there any connection between 13th century Kabbalah and the secrets of the 3rd century or the 2nd century? That's the question. This is one of the things I tried to talk about or demonstrate in a course I give at Hebrew Bar Ilan, which I call Jewish mysticism from antiquity to the Middle Ages, which means, can we draw a straight line from what was considered the secrets in antiquity, even starting from the Bible, prophets were mystics, going all the way to the Kabbalah. I try to see if I can draw a line, and based on what the students think would be the proof whether I succeeded or not. But I'll just give you one example right here. So the Mishnah says, one does not lecture on the laws of incest, which is in Leviticus, a mother with a son, a daughter with a father, a brother and sister, etc. All these things were not allowed according to biblical law. With 3 listeners, this reason already seems to be out of modesty, because when you talk to these laws, the large amount of people make jokes, because that's what people like doing. They like making jokes. Okay, so it says no more than 3 people at a time. But then the Mishnah says something unusual. You cannot discuss the works of creation except among 2 listeners. And this already is not about modesty, it's about because it's a secret. When it comes to secrets, no more than 2 people, because you have to make sure they understood you correctly. And you can't even discuss the works of the chariot, even to 1, unless they are wise with understanding, meaning one-on-one. So now part one we understood. There's verses in Leviticus that talk about incestual laws, and because of that, don't talk to it with an audience, they'll just make fun of it. Okay, I got that. But what was 2 and 3? 2 and 3, the works of creation. The works of creation is Genesis chapters 1 and 2, where it describes God creating the universe and what happens in the Garden of Eden a little bit. So that's called the works of creation. But there's also the works of the chariot, which is Ezekiel chapter. The chariot that Ezekiel sees in this revelation when he's there in the land of the Chaldeans in Babylonia, and the heavens open up and he sees all these unusual. So for the Talmud, these are the 2 secrets of the Bible, Genesis 1 and 2, and Ezekiel chapter 1. But the Talmud doesn't say what the meaning of the secrets are. They just say it's in these 2 chapters. So if you're teaching Genesis 1 and 2, teach it only with 2 people. Now, 2 people means, 2 other people. You and 2 people. But when it comes to the works of the chariot, only 1 other person, and only if they are understanding and wise. So it has 2 extra limitations. 1-on-1, and only if they're wise and understanding. There's a lot of discussion. What are these 2 things? Maimonides, the rationalist, he says the works of creation, that's physics, how the natural world works. The works of the chariot, that's metaphysics. All the Kabbalists say, are you kidding? But that's Maimonides. He writes that in his card for their perplex, etc. And he actually says that this wisdom was lost of Jewish metaphysics, but he tries to put some of the ideas together himself. Nachmanides of the 13th century says, no, these are traditions that we received, and I also received these traditions, and etc. And then there are different interpretations. What's the difference between them? But the point is that there are 2 parts of the Bible which are called the secret. When you look into more, you'll discover that there are actually 3 secrets in Talmudic literature. The 3rd one is the multiple names of God. The Hebrew language has the most names for God than any other language. In English, for instance, I don't know in Romanian, but in English you have God, the Lord, that's it. Aside from that, you have connotations, appellations, right? But that's it, God or the Lord. In Hebrew, you have El, which means God. El Shaddai is another name for God. You have Havaya, the tetragrammaton, the 4-letter name of God, Havaya. Then you have God of the hosts, Hashem Tzvaot, the Lord of the hosts. Then you have Elohim, right? It's another name of God. We're up to 5. Then Elohim Tzvaot is another name of God. Then you have Aleph Dalet Nun Yud, which means God is the master. Another name, we're up to 7. According to Maimonides, these are the 7 names of God which you're not supposed to erase. You can write them, but not erase them. So that's why we try not to write them. According to the Kabbalists, there's another 3. There's Ehyeh, I shall be, which I shall be, which Maimonides doesn't consider one of the names, just the connotation. There's Yud Hey, the first 2 letters of God's name is also a name of God. And what am I missing? I forget. I'm missing one. There is, I forget. But anyhow, there are 10. In the book, Joseph Chikatilo mentions the 10. And aside from that, there are many, many connotations. Like I mentioned before, Kadosh, the Holy One, is also a name of God. The Rock of Israel is the name of God. I mean, there are a lot of connotations for God. Hamakom, the place, etc. So there are many, many names. For the Midrash, the names of God, each one means something. So this also becomes one of the secrets. For instance, the Midrash already says the name Elohim means the God of judgment. When God stands in judgment of the universe, it's the word Elohim. When it's Havaya, the tetragrammaton, that's the God of mercy. And the Midrash claims that the reason why chapter 1, Genesis, is all the name Elohim is because the natural laws of physics are exact laws that follow that you can't break them. It's like stern judgment. You try to break the laws of physics, you die. You walk into a fire, you die. You don't eat, you die. You go out, you get sick, and you don't take care of yourself, you die. That's the laws of physics. There's no mercy in physics. I can't say, okay, next time I'll go out with a coat and I won't be sick. So I don't want to be sick. But you already did it. Sorry. And the Midrash, but in chapter 2 of Genesis, all of a sudden you have God's name, the Tetragrammaton. And the Midrash says, why is that? Because human beings need mercy. And since in chapter 2 it talks about how Adam and Eve were formulated, mankind needs mercy. We can't live according to strict laws because we break them all the time. So we need mercy and we need penitence to be able to mend our ways. So that's why we need the second name too. But you can see the Midrash takes the names of gods as having special meanings. And all the names seem to have meanings according to the Midrash. So this seems to be the third secret of the rabbinic literature. Now the question is, can you draw a straight line from the way the rabbis understood all these three secrets to the Kabbalah? The Kabbalists claim yes. They all claim yes. But the trouble is we don't know enough about what the Talmudic rabbis actually thought about these secrets. We know a little bit, but not enough. What you really have to do is you have to analyze the Midrashim, the non-legal parts of the Talmud and the Midrash, and try to see what they're saying, putting together what they're saying about these secrets. And then you'll be able to draw the lines, yes or no. So were there secrets of Judaism predating the Kabbalah? Absolutely. Are they the same? Depends. The Kabbalists will say yes. Most probably they were slightly different. Even if they weren't completely different, they were slightly different. So, but this is, and all this came out of our discussion, but we talk about the Zohar, can we talk about it as official rabbinic literature or not? It depends on whether the later Kabbalah is connected to the early secrets of the Bible, and whether the Zohar is actually from Shimon Bar Yochai, yes or no. Okay, so I wanted to bring that up in our discussion too, and maybe next time I'll read you one passage from the Zohar, just to get a feeling of the book, and then we'll start our new topic. So, ladies and gentlemen, that basically finishes our